Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2023 Marvel movie Guardians of the Galaxy, Volume 3. Now, before I go any further sharing my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to Brett for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, before I really delve deep into this film, I just want to get some things off my chest when it comes to this movie. I truly, genuinely thought, like a lot of people did, that this would be the modern MCU movie that would break the trend of mediocrity that the MCU is currently mired in. But after seeing the film, I can't really honestly say that's the case. I like the movie okay, but in comparison to the first two, which are honestly some of my favorite MCU movies and just some of my favorite comic book films in general, this was honestly a letdown. It really was. It was underwhelming. It wasn't nearly as memorable. It wasn't nearly as consistently good when it comes to the writing or the characters or the dialogue or the action or even the soundtrack, really. I would say the most consistent good things about this movie were the technical merits, the visual effects, the makeup, the editing, um, the direction by James Gunn, and a handful of performances. Although I personally feel some of the performances in this film leave a little to be desired, or honestly, a lot to be desired. It's a very scatterbrained, scattershot movie where at times it feels like it's just the Rocket Raccoon story in terms of his backstory of his creation, and it guest stars the other Guardians of the Galaxy. And it just makes the movie have a flow and a pace to it that is just very off. And in some ways, I gotta point the blame directly at James Gunn, at his feet here. This is his film. He directed and wrote it, and this is supposedly a franchise that's his baby, and he didn't want anyone else to direct it. Honestly, I would have been intrigued if a different director helmed this one, because of the fact that James Gunn, I don't really feel that his heart was 100% fully into this movie. The opportunity to create a bookend to, or just really a conclusion to Guardians of the Galaxy is something that definitely did appeal to him, but I don't really know if there was really a way to inject fresh new energy and life into this this third entry other than going the opposite direction. And when you go the opposite direction, which is really what Gunn did for the most part, you lose a lot of what makes the first two films so great. What makes the first two Guardians of the Galaxy films so entertaining, so endearing, and so iconic is that they have this good mix of action, comedy, and drama. When you do a 180 and you open the film with Serious Rocket with an acoustic cover of Radiohead's Creep, and you just have this very depressing, sad tone that's really prevalent throughout the movie, with the occasional bits of mirth and comedy and so on. The comedy, the over the top nature of this franchise, which in a lot of ways is a big part of its DNA, feels out of place. So it's one of those things where yes, in order to inject new life and energy into this franchise, you have to do something a little different. But in this particular franchise's case, it's to the detriment of the franchise. It's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of things. And when that kind of scenario occurs with a entry in a franchise, then I think honestly maybe the better route is just not to even make the movie. Maybe do a different thing, maybe do a spin-off, maybe not make it a Guardians of the Galaxy film, maybe make it just a solo rocket movie or something, or a mini series or something along those lines. But I think Disney, for one, was definitely pressuring Gunn because they needed a hit and they needed it now. And this was something that they felt could definitely help alleviate some of their financial pain. And I think that added a lot of extra pressure to Gunn. And I think that did carry over when it comes to the quality of the film. In the first two films, Gunn didn't have the same pressure, especially in the first movie. Gunn had no pressure. They're like, hey, take this obscure comic book and these characters and just make a good movie, make an entertaining movie. Just have fun with it. We'll let you have carte blanche. We'll let you just play in the sandbox, do whatever you want. And then result was movie magic in a lot of ways with the first Guardians of the Galaxy. And the second movie is kind of another one of those things where the studio had faith in James Gunn, so they're like, "Hey, go wild." And I think at times that worked, at other times kind of not with volume 2. Sometimes I feel it honestly plays out a little too overstuffed, kind of similar to this movie at times. And it almost felt like he did it not only just because, oh, I'm going to take the opportunity to do the concluding film in the series and I don't want anyone else to touch my baby, but also he did it as kind of a, in some ways, kind of an FU to some of his critics who criticized him based on films like Guardians of the Galaxy and said that he couldn't do serious, real weighted drama. And so this is almost like his FU to those critics. This is his opportunity to be like, oh, you think I can't do that? Oh, I'll show you. And at times it kind of works, but at other times it honestly comes across more like Stewart from Mad TV. That character where it's like this young boy who's just hyperactive and he's like, "Look what I can do," and just plays the fool. That's honestly what Guardians of the Galaxy 3 at a lot of different points comes across to me when it comes to James Gunn and his direction and his writing with this movie. It's like, oh, look what I can do. I could do serious weighted drama. I'm not just a silly, goofy director. And I'm like, we know you can do that. You did that with Yondu and his whole arc in the second film. You did that with the Suicide Squad, with the Rat Catcher, and I think that's the name of the character, and her father and her arc and all that other stuff. Like we already know that you're capable of that. But in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, it's like he's shoving it in your face. It's like he's forcing that down your throat that, see, I can be serious, I can be emotional, I can, do this, I can be not all fun and games. And I'm like, this isn't really the right film to showcase that. Like, do a drama movie then. Like, go do a drama film outside of the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise. Because from the very opening of the film, the tone just feels completely off, and I don't really feel the movie really recovers from that. If this was something that I guess had to be done from a contractual standpoint, then maybe having Gunn on the sideline, maybe having Gunn as one of the writers, maybe having a fresh new director in there might have benefited the film a little bit, because then you would have another instance of a director who doesn't have the same pressure anymore. Yeah, it's a different sort of pressure because, oh, you're doing the third Guardians of the Galaxy and so on and so forth. But you can retool things so it's not intended to be the final film. Like, it could be the final movie with things set up a certain way, which honestly, when you look at the movie as it is, it kind of doesn't necessarily end everything, especially not Star Lord's story. And there's definitely some places where you can just pick up with these other characters with potential spin-offs or other entries or a fourth film. So it's not like it just flat out is like it's over, it's done with, like Back to the Future Part 3, for instance. There's not really that kind of finality to this movie. So having, a fresh new face as a director with a new vision might have been worth it this time around. That being said, his direction is not bad. It's not a bad job. It's just I feel like he gets in his own way too often because of the approach that he's taking with this film. And I definitely feel Disney was also involved too, kind of handcuffing him a little bit. So there are moments where it plays it a little more safe than maybe the other two films did. And that definitely doesn't do the film any favors. But from a visual perspective, from just a technical standpoint, when it comes to the selection of shots, the framing, the way that Gunn interacts with his cast or his crew, uh, it's still a really nice looking film. But it just feels like that heart, that passion, that energy that was there in the first two movies, it just doesn't really feel there, like it's there, despite all of the emotion and the tear jerking scenes and all of this other stuff. It feels more manufactured. It feels more artificial, where it felt more natural and genuine in the other two films. And that's why I feel like Gunn isn't fully invested in this. It's a bummer. It really is, because I love the first two films. The second film I don't like as much as the first, but I still really enjoy it. And this, I can't say I love the film. I can't say I love Gunn's take on it. I can't say that I love his approach with the film. Really making it heavily focused on Rocket, less on the team. One of the biggest issues with the second movie, not the first movie. The first movie did a wonderful job having the characters interact with one another when they team up, and just having this great balance of action and comedy and camaraderie. In the second film, there's a lot of dead air. There's a lot of scenes that just kind of sit there stagnant because the characters aren't together. The team isn't together. And in this, it's the same thing. The same mistakes are made where the team isn't together. And some of that is out of Gunn's control because of the stuff with Gamora. Like, what are you going to do after Infinity War and Endgame with her character? And on that note, I know in the comics that happens with Gamora. I think the writers should have taken some creative liberty there and not killed her off. I genuinely feel that way, because Guardians of the Galaxy, the way that they were constructed, the way that they were prior to Endgame and Infinity War, was honestly some of the most promising group of characters the MCU had to offer, and definitely some of the most popular. And when Gamora died, even though in a vacuum it works for that particular film, it really ruined something. The Guardians of the Galaxy were never the same after that. The dynamic was never going to be the same. And this film's proof of that because Gamora's back, but it's not the same Gamora. It's a Gamora from years prior who's a Ravager who doesn't really remember anything when it comes to her relationship with Peter or with the other Guardians. So it's awkward. And the scenes with this Gamora just really feel out of place and forced, just like the heavy emotional focus when it comes to this movie. It's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, right? Are we supposed to have fun? Are we supposed to enjoy ourselves? Is this really the same franchise that had the opening of the second movie be a big over the top kaleidoscope color sequence with all of the members of the Guardians of the Galaxy fighting a monster to Mr. Blue Sky with Baby Groot dancing in the background? It's one of those things that's like, this is just tonal whiplash to the extreme degree. You go from that opening to Rocket basically looking like he's about to cry to Radiohead's Creep. And then after that, it just gets even more. It's depressing. There are moments at the end where it tries to seem like, oh, it's all happy, but it feels very. It's another thing that feels artificial to me. About as artificial as the evolutionary's fake face. This is one of those things. It's like it just feels like a facade. It doesn't really feel like, oh, it's a genuinely happy ending. Especially when Peter's happy ending is just him going back home to be with his grandfather, who's like 90 something years old, who's probably going to die soon anyway. Yeah, it can't be with the love of his life. She goes back with the Ravagers because it's that whole thing about let her do her own thing, but it's like that's just a shitty way to end this franchise. It's so bittersweet. And I don't necessarily I can't blame Gunn for that because he's working with what he's dealt, which just it's just another reason why maybe don't do this movie. Maybe do something else with the Guardians, or if you do, don't even bring Gamora into it. Don't even bring her back, because then it just creates this very just awkward stuff with her character. And honestly, I know what they're trying to do with Gamora in this, or at least what Gunn was trying to do, but I hated Gamora in this. She was standoffish in the first film, but there was still something about her that you didn't mind, and you saw a little glimpse of maybe potential turn for her for the better. But here, like unsympathetic, mean, nasty, just a total bitch, really, in all honesty. And that's just that's a huge problem that I have with the writing of this movie. And this whole portion of this video at this point is just me kind of venting and rambling about James Gunn's script because I don't like the way that he writes the Guardians in this, as well as other characters, especially Adam Warlock. Like, I think the way Adam Warlock is written in this is criminal. I'm a fan of Adam Warlock. I was actually pretty hyped when the teaser was shown at the end of the second movie that Adam Warlock was going to be uh, um, going after the Guardians, or he was going to be a part of the MCU. And then when you finally see him, he's a pathetic mama's boy and a joke and a horribly underwritten character. And he's so bad in this in terms of the writing that I don't know how anyone with this first impression would ever want to read any of his comics or be interested in any of his exploits in the future. It's such a unbelievably bad job by Gunn when it comes to this character. And other than Rocket, I mean, what have you got with these other characters and their arcs? It's supposed to be like the third conclusive entry in the series, right? Peter is a drunk and he's depressed and he's sad because Gamora is still alive technically somehow, even though that makes no sense when you think about it. But okay, now that I'm just gonna roll with it, Gamora's alive, but she doesn't remember him, so he's just down in the dumps, and he's not his normal self. And he's honestly a lot closer to Yondu. And you have the stuff with Rocket and the prequel stuff with him and the experimented on animals and him and his backstory with the evolutionary guy. And it's one of those things where, okay, all right, at one point it was kind of interesting, but the more it went on, the more it got very saccharine and just very predictable and played out. And then it just it just felt like it was just dragging the film down to me because I'm like, is this what when is this team, when are they going to be the Guardians of the Galaxy? When am I going to see the Guardians of the Galaxy and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3? Because Rocket spends most of the movie on life support, and at least adult Rocket, so you just get Rocket in the flashbacks. And then when it comes to the other team members, like, yeah, they team up and they do their thing, but it just doesn't have the same magic because Gamora is a total bitch and Quill is just not really his himself. Drax and Mantis are always bickering now, and Nebula, of course, she's bickering because that's just the majority of her character, and it's just not fun to watch a lot of the time. You have the sad backstory with Rocket and his furry pals, and then you have the Guardians, and it's also kind of sad, and then irritating because the dialogue isn't really funny most of the time. The banter it is just a lot of people yelling at each other. And going back to the character arcs, like yeah, Quill, oh he learns to let go and realize that Gamora, it's not meant to be, and he can move on, and he goes home and he ends that particular chapter of his life and but still leaves things open for him to join the Guardians in the future or the Avengers or whoever else. But something that's presented as more of like a redemption arc, it kind of is with him doing his part to stop the high evolutionary, but he has to get saved by Adam Warlock so they can have Adam Warlock do something other than just be useless. And that doesn't do any either of those characters favor when it comes to their arc throughout the story. Doesn't really help Adam Warlock, and it doesn't really help Star Lord because it's like, what? Why were you not out there with your jetpack, with your jet boots and your mask anyway? Like you just forgot it? You just left it in a drawer somewhere, Peter? Like really? And it also just felt like, oh, let's rehash what happened with Yondu, but this time with Star Lord and Adam Warlock. And I'm like, that just feels like a retread and doesn't have the same emotional power to it. Not even close. And Drax, they do this thing with him where they try to make it into a positive with him becoming more of a father figure to these other high evolutionary kids. But I just felt it was just a further emasculation of this character. And honestly, it's not really something that I feel is worth dancing in the streets about when it comes to Drax. Like, yeah, it's kind of sweet that he gets to be a father figure, considering the fact that he was a father and he lost his kids and his wife when Ronan killed them in the past and so on and so forth. So I see what Gunn's trying to do there, but in execution, it just feels like the character is just stripped away of pretty much anything that made him Drax the Destroyer. Now he's Drax the baby talk guy. And that's honestly kind of embarrassing. It was already going in the wrong direction in the second movie where he's talking about his poop, and you have the whole stuff with him and Mantis and him being very antagonistic towards her and not necessarily in the same sort of fun but oblivious way as in the first movie. He was kind of acting like a jackass in volume 2. And then that just carried over further on. And now he's doing goo goo gaga talk. And it's just like, this is sad. This isn't dancing in the streets kind of stuff for me. Like, you go from Drax in the first film to this. This is just sad. It's not something that I'm happy about. Groot, what a nothing character. It seemed like, oh, teenage Groot, that's gonna be fun. They're gonna play around with him acting like an angsty teenager. That was just in the end credits of Volume 2, because now he's a teenager and he's all buff, and there's no arc to his character whatsoever. There's nothing to his character other than him being there and being utilized for some action sequences and using Groot to smuggle in weapons in one scene. That's it. That's all you get with Groot. Like, it's almost like James Gunn just didn't even try when it comes to Groot. Nebula, there's an attempt there with trying to bring some more humanity to her and do some stuff with her and her sister and have the whole thing where she gets to I guess be a mother of sorts to these other kids and teach them things and show them a life that she never had when she was raised by Thanos. And I'm like, okay, all right, but there's just a lot of stuff with these characters and the arcs that other than Rocket, really, it just feels so unearned or just not very well written or just non-existent, which is disappointing for what's supposed to be this concluding chapter in the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise. And I mentioned the tone earlier, I'll mention it again. The tone is just wildly uneven in this movie. It starts from the beginning of the film and it doesn't really stop. You have the whole sequence at Orgo Core, and I don't know what the hell James Gunn was smoking with this scene. This sequence is just gross and weird, and not in an interesting or funny way, just in a way that just feels like Gunn just wanted to be weird for weird's sake again, like he's done in other movies, but this time with Orgo Core, with the security guards wearing suits that look like shriveled up, shaven scrotums, and walls that look like skin, and all this slimy like meat looking aspects of the environment, and it just very almost looked like something out of Cronenberg's Existence or something. I'm like, what the hell is this? It was just such a distracting uh, uh, style choice for me. It just felt so out of place, and it has this like 60s aesthetic too that's mixed in with all of this, and I'm like, what? Like, there's just a lot of like, just what the hell? That whole scene was like one massive WTF, and not in a good way to me. Like, that was off-putting. And that's just an extension of just Gunn just not really finding his stride here compared to the first two films. And you've got this stuff with the evolutionary, and I appreciate the fact that the villain is written in a way where he's not sympathetic. That is refreshing. I appreciate that Gunn went that route. But the character is still incredibly dull, incredibly forgettable, because he has no genuine backstory other than him wanting to be a god, a replacement for God. Other than him wanting to play God and create the perfect furry race, like other than that, like there's really nothing to his character. A lot of his backstory is just firmly tied into Rocket's backstory, and Rocket gets more of it. It doesn't help either that when the guy finally gets a chance to get involved in a battle, he gets his ass kicked in 30 seconds. Like, he's not even remotely a threat. So, that doesn't really help either when it comes to the way that things are written. And also with this script, like, there are a lot of moments where you don't really get a lot of action. And when it is there, like the stuff in Orgo Core, it's just weird and it's not really that exciting or thrilling. Or there's other times where it's just there's stuff exploding and there's stuff happening, but it's just this cacophony of CGI that it doesn't really necessarily provide that much of an adrenaline rush. And when you do get to a good action sequence, like the scene at the end where all the Guardians are teaming up and they're fighting along to the song No Sleep Till Brooklyn, it feels like it's too late because there's not enough of that kind of action and that kind of excitement throughout the rest of the movie. Because it feels like the movie is really focused more on the chronicles of Rocket Raccoon than it is making a Guardians of the Galaxy film. That's why Adam Warlock doesn't really have a lot in terms of the writing, in terms of his place in the story, and he just feels like an afterthought. Because really, it's just a Rocket Raccoon story, and I don't really care for that. That's not really what I want out of a Guardians of the Galaxy film. I want Guardians of the Galaxy, not Rocket Raccoon and friends. You know, that's just that's that's just I like Rocket, but not to that extent. Despite all my issues with this script and this story, it does have its moments. There are moments where you see a little bit of that magic that the first two films had, whether it's a funny line of dialogue or some good banter with the characters or a good action sequence or even some of the moments with Rocket and his backstory. But I can't help but feel honestly just not enthralled or excited throughout the story or that invested because it just plays out in such a way where things are just so scattered in terms of the structure of the plot and the story. And it doesn't feel very satisfying either at the end of the day. Like, yeah, these characters, they didn't all die. You get a golf clap for that one, James Gunn. You didn't kill off half the Guardians of the Galaxy like I expected you might do as an even more extreme turn or fu to the critics. That doesn't by default make it a good movie or a good story. Now the cast, you know, they're fine. They're good. I mean, Chris Pratt, a lot of his stuff is him being angsty and sad and depressed. So you don't really get a lot of the energetic, fun charm that you really like about this character, but you get a little extra depth to him. So there's that. And Chris Pratt does pull that off rather well. Zoe Saldaña, I don't really feel she did a good job playing this different version of Gamora because I didn't really find her charismatic. I didn't find her likable. There were moments where she was hard to get or hard when it comes to her exterior in the first movie before she softened up, but she was still likable. Here, I didn't like her at all. I thought she was just ugly and mean, and not necessarily ugly in terms of her appearance, but just because her attitude is just very ugly and mean. And I think that's kind of the point, but it's just off-putting and just makes her presence just feel very invasive, like just unnecessary. Like, what, we don't even need Gamora then. If Gamora is going to be here and it's just opposite Gamora, like it's Bizarro Gamora. Like, I don't need Bizarro Gamora. Just have her remain dead instead of doing this. Bautista as a Drax. I mean, you know what? He got an easy little paycheck here because he rode a motorcycle for a few scenes and didn't really do a lot of action, didn't do a lot of strenuous work. Little some moments in that sequence with No Sleep Till Brooklyn, but you know, a lot of it's just him trying to be funny and not really doing that great of a job, or just doing baby talk. Um, Karen Gillian, I just I like Nebula, but I liked Nebula more when there was this whole contentious sort of back and forth between her and Gamora and the other Guardians. When she's a Guardian, she just doesn't really feel like she's really in the right place. You know, that kind of thing. It's like one of those, I never really bought Nebula as a Guardian of the Galaxy. I just don't I her as a fully turned to the light side good character, it just took away a lot of what made her interesting and unique, and just made her boring. Mantis, I mean, I liked Mantis in the second movie. Here, like, she doesn't really have much of a presence here. I forgot to even mention her when it comes to her arc as a character, because I don't even remember her having one. And if she did, it wasn't really that interesting or that memorable. Same thing happens with like Groot. I already mentioned how Groot is just a nothing role. Vin Diesel, like just getting a paycheck. Bradley Cooper, you know, he did a great job once again as Rocket. He was basically the star of the movie. And he carried it as well as he could. Will Poulter, I thought he was miscast from the beginning. I'm like, what, the nerdy, dopey kid from Where the Millers is Adam Warlock? Come on now. And I still feel that way. I didn't buy him in the role. No matter how much muscle, no matter how much uh, face paint they put on him and CGI and all of that, I never bought him as Adam Warlock. And it's not just because of the casting choice, though. It's not just because of him. It's also because of the way the character's written. So I kind of feel bad for Will because I don't think he was ever given a fair shot to really show that he could be a good Adam Warlock, or a character that really feels like something special or grand. Sean Gunn, I mean, his replacement Yondu, and nowhere near as fun to watch. The whole bit where he uses his heart to use the arrow was just so corny and just And Chukwudi Iwuji is a high evolutionary. Most of the time he's just screaming or he's just overacting, and his character just has one mode. It's just always yelling or just being demonstrative. And it got on my nerves and it got grating really fast. Like, he honestly played out like a Saturday morning cartoon villain, and considering the film is trying to be very serious with this character and the Rocket's backstory with this guy, it just made this performance just feel so just awful. I genuinely thought his performance sucked. Just a bad performance to me. Just over the top and just chewing the scenery, and with a different actor, maybe it might have played off better, but I didn't really. There was nothing genuine about it. This guy trying to act, I am God. How dare you besmirch me? I am the evolutionary, and talking about his grand ideals for a new society and all this other stuff. And it's not like he was saying anything new. I think that was another thing. The script didn't really help him, but I don't think the actor helped either. Shouting most of his lines and just being over the top and corny in so many different ways. Like the scenes where he's trying to be intimidating, I thought were laughable. Like I didn't buy it one bit. And look, he got his butt kicked by the Guardians in 30 seconds. So he wasn't really that intimidating to begin with. Linda Cardellini, she voiced the otter, who was Lila, who was friends with Rocket. She was good too. Did some good voiceover work. It was fun to see Sylvester Stallone again as Stakar. Nathan Fillion's in this as a sentry at Orgo Corps. And yeah, it's nice to see Nathan Fillion, but it felt like a waste. Him walking around in a scrotum suit. But yeah, good cast. I think some performers are definitely better than others. And like I said, I feel that some of these performers kind of don't deliver the best performances in this because they're just kind of going through the motions, but that's honestly what they're given with the script. So I can't really necessarily blame them. Uh, has some good technical aspects like the cinematography. It's a nice looking film. Has some good editing by Fred Raskin and Greg Diaria. The music, the score, just I really not anywhere near as memorable as any of the music that the composer did for the first two films. Other than maybe hearing the Guardians of the Galaxy theme, but nothing new really stands out. And even the soundtrack was disappointing. Like, there's some good songs in this soundtrack, but it's not nearly as personal or as different or really as fun as the awesome mixes from the first two films. The soundtrack here just felt like more music video fodder. Like, let's throw in this classic song just because kind of thing. It just didn't necessarily feel like it had the same vibe or just feel as the song or the soundtrack from the first two. Just having it be a random playlist, I don't think was a good choice and a good call because it took away a lot of the personal, unique elements of the awesome mixes from the first two films. The songs were the songs that Peter's mom grew up with, that Peter's mom loved, and Peter uh, learned to love as the years went on. And they were classics. And the songs that play in this, it just feels like somebody's Spotify playlist is on shuffle. Best Marvel movie in years? Not to me. I honestly felt it was just more of the same, which just makes it arguably more disappointing than something like Ant-Man 3 or some of the other lesser MCU films that have come out lately. It's like the equivalent of like drinking tap water. You're like, oh, it gets the job done. It hydrates me, but I'd rather drink something else. It's that kind of thing. Anyway, thanks for watching my thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.